New Balance can be pretty low-key when it comes to publicizing their new football boots. And just over a month ago, they quietly refreshed one of their main product lines with the Tekela V5. And this replaces the V4 Plus that released last year, which was, in my opinion, one of the best football boots you could get on the entire market. So the big question is, what did New Balance actually change with this new version? Well, that's what we're going to cover in this video, and stick around because there are some noticeable changes between the V4 and the new V5. So we'll cover everything that you need to know so you can decide whether or not these are going to be a good option for you. And of course, after watching the video, if you're interested in these or any of the other boots that we discussed, you can find links to them on sale with discounts in the description below. Let's get into it. So when it comes to the design, I think New Balance had the really hard task of improving upon what was already a great design in the Tekela V4. And from a distance, you may think there are a lot of similarities. You're still going to have this one-piece upper with a stretchy, elasticated knit collar. But upon closer inspection of the V5, you will actually see that the upper is pretty much completely changed from the previous V4. Now, instead of the really sleek matte upper that you got on that previous version, you're going to have much more grip and a little bit of modest padding throughout the length of the upper. You can see that the upper is going to have this wavy texturing to it, and then on top of that texture, you're going to have these small micro dots here, which you can see in red, and each one of these dots is going to add additional grip throughout the upper. And because these dots actually do cover pretty much the entire length of the football boot, they actually add a pretty substantial amount of grip to the boots. So it's not necessarily something I'd say that's just there for gimmicks or for looks, but it actually does seem to provide some amount of function. In my opinion, I think the real reason that New Balance wants to go in this direction of adding more grip to the Tekelas is because they see this boot as more in the control category, the same category that the Predator from Adidas and the new Phantom 6 from Nike are currently occupying. It seems like every brand right now wants to have at least one football boot in their line that's going to have that really grippy upper, and in New Balance's case, they decided to make that the Tekela. Now, beyond that more sticky and adhesive upper, you're going to get that same pretty premium hypo knit material that's running through the center of the boots under the lacing system and around the collar. And then you're also going to get a nice padded heel liner along with a removable insole. Now, moving over to the back of the boots, this is where you're actually going to see not many changes compared to the previous versions. You're going to have essentially the same FG outsole that we've seen for at least the past 3 years. And for those who don't know, this Tekela sole plate is going to comprise of mostly conical studs throughout the center, and then also 4 rounded studs towards the heel area. But then towards the edge of the boots, right along the perimeter, you're actually going to have these shorter bladed studs. Now, the main goal behind adding these short bladed studs around the edge of the boots is to give you a little bit more bite into your playing surface when you're changing directions and you're on the balls of your feet. I've always been a pretty big fan of this sole plate. This is actually some technology that we've seen employed with cleats in other sports. I believe in American lacrosse, you do actually see cleats that have bladed studs towards the perimeter just to give a little bit more traction when players are changing direction. Now, that being said, I think this is a great sole plate for use on firm ground natural grass, but I do think that those bladed studs towards the perimeter may be a little bit too aggressive for some players to use on artificial grass. Now, that being said, you are going to have these conical studs in contact with the ground for most of the time because they are a little bit longer, but you never know. Sometimes when you're playing and you're changing direction, if your foot is at an angle against, say, an artificial playing surface, you may have the risk of those bladed studs digging in and maybe getting caught. This is one criticism I have of the Tekela that we'll discuss later, but it is near impossible to find a pure artificial grass variation of these boots. But if you do primarily play on FG, this is going to be a great choice. Now, unlike with some other brands, when it comes to finding the best fit for the Tekela V5s, you don't just have to focus on sizing, but you also have the opportunity to get these in a standard or a wide variation. And I believe at the moment, the only 2 main brands I know that offer standard and wide variation of their boots are going to be New Balance and Asics. And because I do have a slightly wider foot, I decided to get my pair here in the wide variation just because it is going to give you a little bit more width and slightly more volume, especially towards towards the toe box area. And overall, I've got to say, in keeping with the previous Tekela models we've seen over the last couple years, the V5 is extremely comfortable on feet. And I think that's going to apply whether you get the standard or the wide variation. The lockdown feels really smooth and even throughout the entire length of the boots. They're extremely secure around the ankle and heel area, and once you get them laced up, I personally didn't notice any slipping whatsoever. And also, I found, at least in my personal experience, New Balance boots, whether it be the Tekela, the Furon, or the 442, they just usually have a slightly more anatomical shape to the toe box, which means it just does a better job at naturally fitting the shape of your foot. Now, in terms of sizing, I think I would have two different recommendations. If you do plan to go with the standard width variation, I'd recommend going true to size. But if you are interested in the wide variation that's going to have a little bit more volume at the front of the boots, I would potentially explore getting a half size down, just because you're going to have a little bit more space. I think I maybe could have gotten away with getting a 10 US in these, but instead I went with my standard 10.5. They were still really, really comfortable, but I think maybe I would have had a slightly more barefoot feel had I gone a half size down. Now, one thing I quickly want to note when it comes to the heel area as you're breaking these boots in, I have noticed in the past, especially with some other New Balance models, that the heel area can be quite firm, despite the fact that there is a lot of internal padding in there. It's just a pretty rigid structure. What that does do is it provides you a lot of lockdown and security. It ensures that your ankle and heel are really stable in the boots. But I have experience with some New Balance models that after a session or two, I can notice a little bit of heel irritation at the back of the boots. And in my personal experience, after about a month or so, when you've really worn the boots, say for 3 to 4 weeks, it usually does go away and your heel kind of adjusts to playing in the boots, but it's just something to be aware of. It doesn't happen to some players and it does happen to some others. It's just something to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to the touch on the ball, I did actually notice some differences here with this compared to the V4 Plus, and that's going to be because this new upper. I definitely thought that the touch was a little bit more padded and ultimately did feel a little bit more grippy as well. And another thing I noticed that probably New Balance wasn't intending to do was that I thought this almost felt like a synthetic variation of leather, similar to Nike's Fly Touch that they put on the recent Tiempo Legend 10. It does just have that flowing, natural feel to it. I'm a big fan of that because I do love leather football boots. So if that kind of slightly plush, natural leather feel is something you like, you might actually feel really at home in these boots. Now, the base material of the upper, which you can see in blue here, is actually quite sticky on its own. And the fact that New Balance went and actually covered it with these orange micro dots just makes it that much more grippy. So these do feel like they have a really sticky, adhesive touch on the ball. The only boot with more grip that I've tried on within the past year would be the Phantom from Nike. So whether or not you prefer this feel compared to the Tekela V4 is just going to come down to personal preference. Now, if you like an upper with a more matte finish that's not going to get stuck to the ball, I'd recommend checking out the V4, which is still currently on sale. You can get either the V4 or the V4 Plus. But if you want something that is going to have that more grippy finish throughout the upper, then the V5 is going to be the way to go. But in terms of overall fit and comfort, it is going to be pretty much identical to the V4 Plus. Now, when it comes to value, this is an area where top-end New Balance boots really shine and stand out. Because at full price, the top-of-the-line offerings from Nike and Adidas, while they're great boots, are going to cost you more than $260. Whereas the V5s here come in at a full retail price of $215, making them $50 more affordable. But in terms of build quality, performance, and overall comfort, this is easily going to be at the same level. Some could even argue higher as the offerings from Nike and Adidas. And now the V5s are still a pretty new release, so it is harder to find them on sale. But if you like the style and you like the Tekelas, I would recommend checking out the V4 or the V4 Plus, because that was an amazing football boot, and because it's been out for over a year, you can find them on sale for like $100 off. Either way, compared to its top-end competitors, the V5 is still going to be great value. Now, Now, when it comes to the main competitors in this control boot category, while I don't really think it makes total sense to split boots up into these different silos, because really anyone can wear any boot that works for them, if you want to look at the boots that have a little bit more grip, it's going to be these, the Phantom 6s from Nike, and then the new Predator Elite. Now, in terms of grip specifically, I'd say that these are pretty much on par with the Predator Elites. The two boots do have a different design, but they're both going to offer you a moderate amount of stickiness. But the Nike Phantom 6s and really any Nike boot that has that grip knit coating is going to be just a little bit stickier than this. Now, in terms of width, if you are a wide-footed player, I think even the standard variation of the Tekela V5 is going to offer you just a little bit more room compared to the Predator and the Phantoms. I think they're all comfortable boots, but I'd say the widest would be the Tekelas, and then in the middle would be the Predators, and then on the slightly more snug side would be the Phantoms. And then in terms of price, as I mentioned, it's not really a competition. The Tekelas are going to be $50 cheaper. However, one area where the Nike Phantom and the Adidas Predator have an edge over the new Tekelas is the fact that Nike and Adidas both offer AG versions of those boots that are really easy to get pretty much wherever you are in the world. And while I do think a lot of players could get away with using this sole plate on artificial grass, I do wish that New Balance came out with a more suitable version for that playing surface. Now, another competitor that I think a lot of players may consider is going to be New Balance's other top-end offering, the Furon V8. Now, I reviewed the V8s a couple of months ago and I was really impressed with them, and it's honestly really hard for me to choose between the two boots. I think they're both great. They even have the same $215 retail price. In terms of fit and feel, they're both extremely comfortable, but I will say I think it's my personal preference to have a football boot with an upper that's a little bit more slick and has more of a matte coating to it. So in that respect, I slightly prefer the Furon V8, but it could really go either way. They're both amazing football boots. If you get the opportunity, you could always try both on and see which one works better for you. The new Tekela V5 manages to maintain the same features like comfort and build quality that make the Tekela line great, but they also managed to sneak in some pretty big changes that a lot of players are going to like. And if you are looking for a pair of boots that offers a nice amount of grip and a subtle amount of padding while still giving you a pretty minimal feel, these are going to be right up your alley. And guys, that is going to do it for this video. Let me know in the comments below if you've had the chance to try on these boots and what you think of them. Also, please leave a like on the video if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.